Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I just appreciate you watching. Today we're going to talk about conditionals and loops and just have a good time with that. We're also going to talk about another fun little concept that I like to talk about, the idea of truthy and falsy in JavaScript. But as always with these, we'll spend a lot of time just doing some demonstration. You know, I've really enjoyed just kind of taking some time and just sitting and building some of these sites that we've been doing. Even though they, going through and kind of building the HTML and CSS, I've been doing it kind of fast. I'm going to try to do that part pretty fast. And then, when we get to the actual JavaScript part, kind of slow down and focus on that a little bit more, since that's what we're focusing on. But I've really been, I've been enjoying kind of doing that and just taking the time and actually building sites and letting you all kind of see that in context. So we're building kind of everything there. It's been a good time. But conditionals and loops, right? And we get more into loops, I think, next week. Although I should say up front that next week we won't have our usual live session. There is a campus event next Monday that is a professional development day. That is a requirement for all employees here at the college next Monday, which means my attention will be drawn elsewhere. So for our next module, I'll be posting a pre-recording, which will be our array module. However, I have some good recordings already in the bank for talking about JavaScript arrays, and I might record something new as well. We'll see how we'll play it by ear, see how it goes. Because we're kind of talking about arrays this week. Although not really, right? Because one of the things that we'll be utilizing builds an array, but it doesn't really use, we don't really talk about the actual data structure of an array until our next module. So we're using arrays, but we're not really talking about arrays yet. We're kind of just we're using something that makes an array for us, right? And we have worked with conditionals and loops in other programming languages before, so the idea of a conditional and a loop, these aren't foreign concepts to us, right? These are the things that we've basically said that every single programming language has, right? If you take ourselves way back to CTI 110, we basically said that every single programming language has four primary items. That's the ability to take an input, the ability to send an output, some form of repetition, whether we're talking about recursion or loops or what have you, the ability to make decisions, which are our conditionals in that case, and the ability to do math. Right, these are our five most kind of standard basic things that every single programming language can do. And so JavaScript is no exception, and we can actually unlock a lot of power of JavaScript with these sorts of things, right? And so, as we're kind of working through, we are kind of building on what we know previously about JavaScript, based on, kind of what we're doing in the future. So all the things that we've done in the last couple of modules, well, of course, they still apply, right? Those rules haven't changed. We're just adding new concepts to them. So let's just refresh ourselves with talking about comparison operators, and we actually have an additional comparison operator that we talk about in JavaScript that is a little different from other programming languages. But we talk about comparison operators in relation to really conditionals and loops, right? Because we need to be able to check a condition in a conditional or a loop just to make sure that something is, or to check to see if something is true or false. So we are making this comparison between operands, right? The operator compares two operands, on either side, and it returns a logical value based on whether or not that comparison is true, right? A is greater than B. A is less than C. D is equal to 7, whatever. Right? These are things that we've encountered before as we've approached the concept of comparison operators. And when we're working with this in any programming language, these operators can be numerical, they can be strings, they can be logical. And when we're saying logical here, we're talking about Booleans, we're talking about trues and falses and all that kind of fun stuff. Or they could be object values. Right, which we get to objects a little bit later on. And strings are compared based on standard lexicographical ordering. So if we say that, so we can actually say that A is less than B because A comes before B in the alphabet, right? So, that comes from the idea that we've talked about previously of ASCII values, right? Like if we take the value A and we take the value B and we break them down into their ASCII values, B has the higher number ASCII value, and so it's greater than, right? But that also means that an uppercase A is less than a lowercase a, right? Because in our ASCII charts, all of our uppercase values have lower numbers than our lowercase values. So our uppercase Z has a lower value than our lowercase a, and so on and so forth. So if we're making greater than, less than comparisons between these values, then that is something that we have to sort of deal with there. Right, so that is a situation that we are dealing with. But our operator chart looks a little something like this. Right, and 1, 2, 3 down, you might notice something a little new, a little different here, right? And that is the strict equals. That is the triple equals symbol. Which is somewhat unique to JavaScript. I think there are, maybe a couple other languages that have something similar to this. Because if you'll look at our, on line 1 of our table here, of our comparison operators, we have our standard equals, our standard equals comparison operator. That returns true if both of our operands are equal in value to one another. But then when we notice all the way in our right-hand column there, examples returning true, we see something that's kind of interesting. Right, that third example there, we have a 3 without quotes being set equal to a 3 in quotes, knowing that that is a string value, and having an understanding that this is an example that will return true in JavaScript. And this is probably one of those places where JavaScript is a little bit weird. Right? If we, if we're using, and we'll use our friend the console just a little bit here. So I will do some examples on clevelandcc.edu in just a bit. But if I bring up my inspect element tool here and use my friend the console is going to evaluate JavaScript for me. So I can console.log 3 equals 3 in quotes. And we can see that as the slide tells us, that actually does return true. Right? Whereas, some other programming language, something like Java, something like Python, right? If we were trying to compare an integer value to a string value, that's going to return false, right? Because these are two completely wholly separate things. This is one of those issues where JavaScript is a little bit weird. Right? And so in these sorts of cases, we use the strict equals or the triple equals sign. Right? So that we ensure that the value coming in is an integer or a string, just like the value that we are comparing against. Right? So if we look at that same value there, if we look at our same console here, and we console.log and we check a 3 equals 3 in quotes, in this instance, we will return a false to our console there. Because these values are not the same type. Right? They're the same value, but they are not the same type. So in our first instance here, they are the same value, and type does not matter when we're using the double equals comparison in JavaScript. So 3 is a 3 as an integer and a 3 as a string is still a 3, doesn't matter. But when we are checking data type against one another in JavaScript using our triple equals, that's where we start to have this issue. And so if we want to make sure that we're dealing with the same data type and we want to make sure that things are what they should be, which is important, right, when we're dealing with code. One of the things, we've talked a lot about the idea of precision before and being precise and being accurate. There are certain things where, we're gonna be glad that the double equals exists and acts in that sort of way. But then there are certain instances where, we're really going to want to make sure that we are checking against the actual data type there to ensure that the data type and the value are exactly the same in that regard. So that is something that is important for us to note as we are examining the concept of our operators. Right, but a lot of the other things that we see here are very similar, right? We have not equal, which is our exclamation point equal. We have a not strict equal, or a strict not equal, I guess is the correct way to say that. So a not equal would actually return true in that last case. If we were using a 3 and a string version of 3. Greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Most of these comparison operators are exactly the same to what we're used to, right? Just we have those couple of differences in there with our strict comparison operators that are that make this just a little bit different from what we're used to from some other languages. To make this even more interesting in JavaScript, we have the idea of truthy and falsy. And so in JavaScript is loosely typed, so it coerces values into Booleans and in different logical statements. So I can basically say something like if 7, and it will return true or false, which is interesting, right? The whole concept of truthy and falsy is interesting to me, right? Just because, there's no comparison there, right? So in JavaScript, I don't even necessarily have to make a comparison. Just some things are true by default because they're kind of, they're truthy, they're truth-ish, if you will. So all values in JavaScript are truthy, except false. Makes sense. The Boolean value of false. Null. 0. Empty string. Undefined. And not a number. NaN. So even something like an empty set that we're seeing here, which is the square brackets there and our square curly braces, are both truthy. So they would return true. Which does tend to trip people up. And it's also one of those things that you might see on like a JavaScript exam if you were to go take a JavaScript test. Because there is something that I see it a lot on these JavaScript exams where you'll see something like what does something like this return if empty curly braces inside of a conditional statement with some curly statements return hello world. Like, what does that do? That actually returns I put that. Yeah. What did I do here? I did something weird here. I always end up messing up my if statements in my console because I don't space them out right. Anyway, we'll deal with that when we get to it. But this would return true, and it would return our hello world statement there. Right, which is kind of interesting. So even though it's an empty set and it seems like it would be false. Yep, semicolon, thank you. Even though it seems like it would be weird and not work the way it should, that would operate for us. I've got something in a weird spot here. It's fine. We will be okay. So our conditionals. With the comparison operators in place, now that we can talk about conditionals, our statement's going to evaluate. You know what? You're right. I'm writing a different programming language there. That's what happens when I am writing too many programming languages at one time. Because I am No? Unexpected. Actually, we probably want to flip this around, come to think of it. We'd want to do this, and then we'd want to do this instead. And that's going to help reveal something a little bit better. Now I've got that at the end there. There we go. Now we fixed it. That's what we want instead. That's the code. That's what happens when you write too many programming languages in a given semester. You end up losing. You end up writing a different programming language when you're supposed to be writing JavaScript. That's what we should be writing instead right there. So that proves what happens when you enter. When you enter our curly braces. So as we see there, we have our if statement. In parentheses there, we put some sort of condition. We can check it against values. And we can do something in between curly braces if it is true. So let's work on building a site. Shall we? Let's go ahead and pull up our VS Code here. We'll get into the terminal. We'll go to our E drive. We'll CD into Web 215. We'll make a directory for con and loop. We'll CD into that. And now we can open that directory. And in fact, I could just open period or code period, and that'll open up a new instance of VS Code with that in it. With that folder open, we'll do index.html. We'll do style.css. And we'll do script.js. Index.html. Let's go ahead and throw our HTML skeleton in there. We'll give the title of conditionals and loops. We won't add any HTML yet. We'll just do everything with our background color for our basic conditional setup so far. And so that means no CSS quite yet, but we'll go ahead and put our link in here for that. So that will be link rel equals style sheet. href equals style.css. Type equals text/CSS, and that's self-closing, and we'll add our script src equals script.js. And so let's create ourselves a variable here. We can create ourselves a variable. We'll do it at the global variable level. And actually, you know what? One of the interesting things that I've done before here for something like this is to actually get a hour variable number, and using the date API in JavaScript and use that for a variable. So we can kind of work with that and do a little proof of concept with that. So we can create a constant for our date object. So we can constant d equals new date. And we'll say we'll use a var, since this will be global, h equals d dot get hours. Right, and if we wanted to see what the hour value is, we can log it. So console.log h. So when we run our site here in our live server, let's pull it over, open in the other window. We can see in our console that it logged 15, right? Because it's 3 in the afternoon. Right, so it's noon plus 3. Which is pretty cool. So we can kind of use this to make a value that sort of changes the background color of our site based on the time of day, which is an interesting concept, right? Because now that we know the hour of day, right, we know how to use a conditional, we can set the hour of the day and use a conditional to break that. So we can say, let's create a function that's called set background. So let's do it using the arrow notation, right? So that'll be a constant. Because remember, when we use arrow notation, we kind of declare it like we're declaring a variable. We'll call this set bg, and we'll set that equal to just use our arrow notation here. Be better if I used an actual equal sign. And our curly braces. And so now between here, we can add our if statement conditional. So if value h, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you all can see this just a little bit better, is greater than some value, say, we'll say 14, right? Because that's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So maybe we're getting into evening hours there. Then we can set our background colors there. So document dot query selector body. We could also just do, we really don't have to query selector, because that's just document.style. Because that would be the same dot background color equals hashtag 525252. Let's just do some kind of dark gray here. Right, and so now we can set that to load when our page loads. So it'll get that variable number, right, from our date API. When the page loads, it'll check, right? So this will be and I actually want to use the DOM content loaded event. So this will be document dot add event listener DOM content loaded. Run my set BG function. Or actually, I should probably do that on the window instead of the document. Although I don't think it matters if I do it on the window or the document. I think either one will work. But if I did that correctly, cannot set properties of undefined. You know what? I probably should do that. Document dot query selector body dot style dot background color. There we go. And so that's going to give us a gray background color. And I might not want it to be that gray background color. I might want it to be a more purpley red sort of dark background. So I might want to go for something that's more like a, let's go for something that's like a 6A, 1-1, 2F. Right, something like that. Something that would be a little bit darker, more like an evening color, you know, something like, you know, a darker nighttime-y sky. There, right? And so now, you know, if it's greater than, if our hour number is greater than 14, which is a benefit to us, right? Because this, in this case, this number is going to be the value between basically 2 o'clock in the afternoon and midnight. Right, so we might want to change this up just a little bit. But this does allow us to set a background color based on... Actually, do I have that in my... I don't. So if I wanted this to be... If I wanted to add an OR statement to this, I could say, you know, if it's greater than 14 or... You know, I could set like some between numbers to it. So I can say, you know, if it's from 0 to whatever. Right, but I can also add subconditions to this, right? So I can add an else if, and I can add an else. Right, so let's just add a morning color here. And so we can do that with an else if. So in JavaScript, these are just spaced statements. Else if. And we add our new condition in between there. So in this case, we can add a little compound condition here. So we can say, you know, if h is greater than 0, and we can say either greater than or equal to 0, ampersand, ampersand for and. H is less than or equal to, let's say maybe 9 a.m. Right, so that'd be 9. And we can set our body color accordingly. Right, so in this case, you know, I might want a little, like a lighter yellow, maybe one of those kind of greeny blue, yellowy kind of colors that you'd see first thing in the morning that would be kind of lighter. Although we're going from midnight to 9 a.m. here, right? So maybe something that's a little darker, maybe something that's like a dark blue. So let's flip-flop around some of our numbers here. Let's say 2F here for our red value. And let's say 6A here for our blue value. And let's just see what that number looks like. So I'm just going to I'm going to comment out this var h temporarily. And we'll set a var h equals something like 6 temporarily. Just so we can see what this value looks like while we're progressing here. Yeah, that's a nice nighttime vibe. You know, a more blue than red, I guess is what I'm going for there. We could add in a little more green maybe if we wanted to. I don't want to quite get it all the way to as much red as I have it here. Maybe something like 20. Yeah, I like that color. That's a nice color. So that's a good visual separator between, you know, the color that's our early morning color and then this color, right? Very different colors. And so else, if it meets any other condition, right? So if it's not greater than, you know, so if it's not greater than 14, if it's not 15 or more, if it is not between 0 and 9, it's going to be our else condition. In that case, it's just the term else, right? So that's all other conditions. We want our website to have a certain other sort of background color. And so in this case, maybe I kind of want to flip it up. I kind of want to maybe make it a lighter color, maybe like an orange color. Let's go for something like a D7 A911, something like that. And, you know, if we were to put in a temporary placeholder value here just to get our var h going here, to just check it, we can put in a value that's like, say, 10 o'clock. So var h equals 10. If we were to look at our site at this point, now we see that's not quite light enough. So I might want to make that a little bit lighter. Let's go FA. Let's go FA D7. Let's try that. I like that a lot more. A nice bright yellow. Good for the daytime. And so with our conditional in place here, where we have a statically, or where we have a dynamically changing value now based on the date API that is built into JavaScript, it will get a new hour value every time the page is loaded. Every time the DOM content is loaded here, or every time the page is loaded, it'll get a new value for the hours. And so the background will change colors dynamically based on what time of day it is. If it's, you know, in the early morning hours, it'll be that dark blue color. If it's in the evening, late afternoon hours like it is now, it'll be that sort of purple colors. And if it's in the midday, it'll be that bright yellow that we were just looking at there. So with that now, let's go in here and let's just do a little bit of HTML here. We're going to be working with a form today, and we're going to be doing some different stuff. So I'm going to want to put let's just put a main in here, and let's put a form inside of that. We're going to put a input type equals text. Value equals, or well, that doesn't get a value. User puts in value there. Name equals fname for first name, and ID equals fname as well. That's sort of my structure for naming these text field objects. So that. Right, we'll do one for first name, one for last name, which will be L name. Let's do one for email. We'll give it a type of email. And we'll give it a name of email and an ID of email. And let's do one for password. We'll give it a type of password so it blurs out the password. And it doesn't blur out the password, but uses the dots in place of the characters. You all know what I'm talking about. You know, this will be kind of a sign-up form. And so in our main, we'll also include an H1 that will just say sign up for our service. What service is that? Who knows? Doesn't matter. So if we look here, we see we got sign up for our service. We got some fields here. We can do a little bit of styling here with our CSS. So we can focus our main. We'll give it a width of, let's say 60 VW, right? And we'll make it margin 0 auto. Getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. We haven't done our resets yet, so let's do some resets here on an asterisk selector. So we will do a margin 0, padding 0, box sizing, border box. And just for fun, let's pull in a Google Web Font. Just pull in a Google Web Font really quickly. And we'll add just a little more styling here. Min height. Let's take our form. We will make it display grid, template columns, 1FR. We will make it a width of 70%. Right, just get a little bit of that. We need to add a button for that form too, don't we? Also, ideally, we'd probably want some like labels here, right? So label for equals fname, first name, last name, email, and password. And let's just throw in a button here really quickly. Button type equals button sign up. And we can add a little bit of input, margin, bottom, just add a little bit of margin on the bottom of our inputs. Give a little bit of space. We'll also give them a little bit of height. Min height. And I actually do think I want that just a little bit bigger. Maybe just so it word wraps just a little bit. Yeah. And let's add a little bit of padding on it. Like so. Very good. Focus our button, and then we can call it bit of a day. Height will go that. And we'll go that. And that's probably good enough for our proof of concept here. So we've got these fields here, and I want to be able to do stuff with these fields, right? So I've got the ability to type some text into these fields. We're going to be able to take advantage of that when we click our button. But before we do more with this, let's just talk a little bit about loops before we continue. Just so we can make sure that we have that covered for today. So when we're discussing loops, we have several different ways that we can work with a loop. We're going to be, there are a lot of different things that we can do with that. Obviously, a loop allows us to do stuff over and over and over and over again. And the while loop is one of the most common ones, right? Like, we always start with a while loop. And we get that while loop sort of context there. But since we are running a little short on time here, I want to skip over the while loop, skip over the for loop, and talk about the for of loop. Because one of the things that we've talked about is we've talked about query selector all previously, right? We've been using query selector until this point. But we said that query selector all exists. And so if we try to use query selector, one of the things that we said that query selector does is it returns the first of a particular type of element. Right, well, query selector all returns all of a particular type of element. However, one of the issues is that it returns all of a particular type of element as an array. Right, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back to that Cleveland Community College website really quickly that we were looking at earlier when we had our console here. And I'd like to just quickly try to select links on the page. So if I document.query selector, and I've written this before, so I'll just use it here. A.style.border 10 pixels solid pink. And then hit enter on that. We see that that just takes the very first link on the page and highlights it. Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you all console.log document.query selector all A. So all of the links on the page. When I run query selector all, it pulls me back this, and it pulls me back what we see here called a node list. But we can see this node list, if I zoom into it here, you can probably see it a little better, has square brackets at the beginning and the end of it. In JavaScript, this is indicative of an array. So we'll talk more about arrays next time, but an array is something that needs to be iterated over. Right, so I have multiple elements here that I need to iterate over. And actually, there is a better way to see all of this that I can kind of, instead of using console.log, I can actually use console.table. So I can take console.log and change that to console.table and run that. And it gives you a table, a tabulated view of all of the links on the page, which is a much cleaner way to read them. And so this is a table of all of the links on the Cleveland Community College homepage. There are 120 of them, believe it or not. So if I want to go through that list, if I want to go through that array, I have to iterate over that array. And if I want to iterate over that array, I need to use a loop. Right, so one of the most common things that we might do as we're kind of getting started with this sort of thing, right, is we will go into a site like this and we'll say, okay, like, I can write a countdown function. Right, and so I can take and I can make a thing, and I can point and I can write a countdown, or I can do whatever, right? And that's helpful. Right, let me actually make sure that I'm giving you all stuff that's going to help you with your labs and such as well. But what's going to help you all just a little bit more than, just using a plain old for loop or a while loop is going to be using, one of those, using query selector all and using the for of loop to be able to do everything on the page. Like, for example, let's say I wanted to change Oh, what would be an easy way to do this? We did the focus. We did focus previously. So that might be one way to do it, or let's see. What am I having you do in the lab? Just style some form elements. So what's pretty interesting here is that I can write a function that would basically be the same sort of function that we did last time when we were giving focus to one of our form elements. So I can write like a function, give focus, and then just, do the same thing like we did last time. Right, document, dot query, selector, all that sort of stuff. And that would allow me to give the focus to this element. But in this instance, I might not want to do that. I might want to do something just a little bit different. And so one of the ways that we looked at kind of doing things like that is that we can add functions onto our event listeners in a bit of a different way. Or, let me think about how I want to do this for a little bit, because I'm kind of off of my notes just a little bit here for what I want to do. So let me think about how I want to do this for just a second, just so I get you a good example here. Yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. So I might want to query and go ahead and get all of my inputs on the page. So we'll create a variable, var inputs equals document dot query selector all inputs. Right, just to make things easy here, we're going to put it in a variable. Right, so if we save this, I should be able to look at my page. I should be able to inspect my page. I should be able to console.log inputs and see that I get a node list here. That I can work with. And actually, it shouldn't be input here. It should be input, which is why there was nothing in that, but nobody caught that. It's fine. So now let's go ahead and look at that with it properly. Inspect element, console.table inputs. Okay, yeah. So there are all four of my inputs on my page: first name, last name, email, and password. So what I want to do is I want to be able to attach an event listener to each of the items in this inputs array that is being built here by this query selector all. So I want to say for let input, or we'll say let inp because I think input is an already used key term. So we'll say let inp of inputs So I'm creating a new variable here in my for of loop, and that's this INP term. So that's basically just going to iterate over this array and do this for each item that's in the array. And I'm going to INP dot add event listener focus, and then we can even do the function inside of here, right? We can do the function on its own, or we can do the function inside of here, right? Which we've not really done that before, I don't think. So let's give that a try. INP.style.border equals 3 pixels solid red. And then we could do the opposite. So I'm just iterating over all of them, adding an event listener to each one for when they're focused. So now, when they're each focused, they each get that, and I made it transparent. I probably should have made it 1 pixel and black instead of 0 pixels and transparent. Now you see that when I click into it, it gets the focus. You can see the thin red outline there. Let me zoom in. So you can see it a little bit better. It'd probably be even better for me to actually make that a little bit wider, like 5 pixels. Nice thick red focus bar there. And then when I click on to the next one. And so since and so it works for all of them, because we use query selector all and we use the for of loop to apply it to all of them. Instead of going through and applying it to it one by one or anything like that, right? Which is pretty useful. We can even take and we can move this up to the top, right up here with the rest of our variables, because I mean we can get that right whenever the document loads. That's fine. Right, that's going to work well for us. Let's write one more kind of click event, since we haven't really done that this week. And let's write something for when it when we enter some text in here, if the first name is a particular name, then we get a different response. So let's just do an alert here, just to do something quick. So let's write a standard function instead of an arrow notation function, and we will write function alert name if, and so we need to get the name value, right? So we're going to run this on button click. So whenever the button is clicked, we can take whatever value is in, let's say, our first name box here and pass it into a variable. So we will say let x equal document dot query selector. We gave that an ID of f name dot value. And now we can check that value, and we can say, well, if value equals, right? Let's say John. We can alert welcome John. Otherwise, or we could do whatever here, right? I'm just doing alert since it's quick. And we can alert welcome Johnny since it's specific. Right, we'll alert hello and concatenate that with the value of X, right? Easy peasy. We'll add an event listener to our button. So document dot query selector button dot add event listener. Click. We will run our alert name function. Right, so now, if it's any other name that gets entered in there, like maybe Ron, R-O-N, they click sign up. Oh, it's getting late in the day. What error did I make? Value is not defined. Oh, did I really do that? Oh, it's getting late in the day. My brain is not working. Let's try using... Oh, my brain sure enough isn't working. That's not value, that is X. Oh, goodness. Oh, it's latent. Yeah, it happens to me too, everybody. Just so you all know. Late in the day. So if we put Ron in here, right, it's going to alert me. Hello, Ron. But if we put John in here, it's going to alert me, welcome, Johnny. Right, so we get that different based on the situation. So I think that gives us a good foundation for what we kind of want to do with loops and conditionals in JavaScript. Obviously, we didn't cover everything here, but we have a good chunk knocked out of it. You have even more to kind of look through in your module. So I'll leave the rest of that to you all as you go through the module. I'll give you the code that we've done here today and the live site as per usual when I post the recording. We'll hang out in the chat for just a couple minutes with the music playing just in case anybody has any questions. Again, remember, no live next week. We'll have a pre-recording next week because I will have to be in a already completed, or I will have to be in a professional development required session next week, so there is that. But I want to thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time.